Hi, how's it going? Hello everyone. I saw yet another generic camcorder on Amazon that caught my eye. And it wasn't because of the catchy brand name, but look at all the Ks. You don't want that disgusting blurry old 4K. You want this superior 5K. That's like more Ks. Obviously, the example in the ad is ridiculous, but this was the first generic camcorder I've seen that claimed 5K, so I decided to check it out. First of all, let's talk about some negatives right off the bat. The marketing is obviously sketchy at best. The body of the camera is exactly the same as several other cheap cameras I've looked at, and it's not very ergonomic. The front lens element has no anti-reflective coating whatsoever, and so, glare is terrible when pointing vaguely in the direction of the sun. Speaking of the lens, there's no optical zoom, no autofocus, and no aperture adjustment. This is a totally fixed lens with a minimum focus distance of around 2 feet. The options and settings are very sparse, the battery gauge isn't super accurate, and the menu and interface aren't the most well thought out. Also, shortly after purchasing the camera, I got a card in the mail from the seller, offering me a $60 Amazon gift card for a positive review. So be very skeptical of any positive reviews of this camera on Amazon. Have a heaping bowl of salt at the ready because there's a very good chance that they are fake or paid for. But there was something strange about this camera. As I used it, I realized something. I don't totally hate it. First, let's start with something basic. I don't think that there is a block of metal in this camera. It weighs about what it looks like it should weigh. I know that sounds silly, but it's such a basic level of honesty that you usually don't get with these cameras. Most of them have blocks of metal in them. I've come across one or two that didn't have blocks of metal in them, but it's nice to find another one that I don't think does. After using the camera for a while, it also occurred to me that it just worked. Sure, there are quirks like there are with all these cameras, but I never found myself struggling to select the right menu option. I never found it failing to record, locking up, or just generally doing anything unexpected. That's one of the most basic of expectations for a camera, that it, works, but it absolutely is not something you can take for granted with generic camcorders. It's possible I just got lucky and maybe others with this exact same camera will have nothing but trouble, but with my sample size of 1, it was a relatively frustration-free camera to use. Also, when in video mode, if you press the photo button, it switches to photo mode and takes a photo. You don't have to press it a second time. And when in photo mode, if you press the record button, it switches to video mode and starts recording, and you don't have to press it again. Little touches like that make it feel like there was at least some thought put into the design of this to make it a camera. The zoom rocker is super stiff, but it doesn't feel like it's about to fall off, nor is it binding so bad I can barely use it. So that's better than a lot of these generic camcorders. And like I said, there doesn't seem to be a block of metal inside. There's also no fake controls or molded in nonsense to make it look like it has features that it doesn't. So did they do it? Is this a real camera? Well, are you ready for the big one? Unlike literally every other generic camcorder I've tested, this one actually has image stabilization. Many of them claim to have it, but this is the first one that actually does. It's digital only, there is a crop, and the actual stabilization is far from perfect. It gets a little blurry in low light, it makes little jerky movements at times, and when the movement gets larger, it sometimes wigs out completely. So it's not great, but it's definitely better than nothing. It even does a reasonable job when walking, so long as you walk carefully. If you walk a little rough or try to pan as you walk, it sort of loses the plot a bit. But still, it actually has image stabilization, and it isn't totally pointless. In terms of image quality, the 5K claim is silly. The 5K video from this camera doesn't even match the detail you get from a good 1080p camera, much less make 4K footage look like garbage, as the ad suggests is the case. Here are crops from this camera, a Sony at 1080p, and a Sony at 4K. Granted, there is a huge price difference. I'm not really saying these cameras should compare, I'm just saying that you shouldn't expect anything near 5K of detail from this camera. As you would expect from a camera like this, the video suffers from noise, smearing from noise reduction, and detail loss from compression. The 1080p 60 frames per second video from this camera looks a bit jagged, and it's certainly a lower resolution that has been up-resed. But it is 60 frames per second and works properly, which is more than I can say for many generic camcorders that I've tested. Issues aside, overall, the videos from this camera are more pleasing than what I get from any other generic camcorder. It isn't overly saturated, it isn't overly contrasty, or overly sharpened. The dynamic range also isn't bad for a cheap camcorder either, and while detail is nowhere near 4K, it's okay for what it is. It's also the first generic camcorder I can remember testing that doesn't have a massive magenta shift to the colors. The white balance modes are actually useful too. In daylight, the daylight white balance mode actually looks pretty good and provides a bit punchier colors than auto white balance. You may or may not prefer that look, but it is a viable option. All in all, the colors are okay. Auto exposure does a decent job as well without any jarring issues or stepping. It's still very basic with only a few metering modes and an option for plus or minus 1 or 2 exposure compensation. But surprisingly, the metering modes actually work. A very basic feature actually working isn't something that should make a list of positives, but this is literally the first generic camcorder where I could actually tell a difference between the different metering modes, and they even seem to match what I'd expect from that setting. Remember, the bar we're clearing here is that the basic functionality of the camera actually works. Still, it's a bar most of these generic camcorders fail to rise to, so it's nice to find one that does. Overall, and when considering the image stabilization, I'd say this camcorder produces the most usable and pleasing video of any cheap camcorder I've tested. Probably the biggest image quality issue, in my opinion, is the bad glare you often get from the front lens element. This is going to make you want to use the massive fiddly lens hood that is included with this camera to minimize that glare. But it's huge and you can't use the lens cap with the lens hood in place, so it's a bit annoying. Speaking of included accessories, this camera comes with pretty much the same cheap accessories that most of these generic cameras come with. Of note are the fact that it comes with 2 batteries, though they are the type of battery that has the contacts sort of raised from flush, so if you were to set this thing down on a table or rest it up against anything metal, they would immediately short out. It also comes with a remote that is a bit of a mixed bag. It could be handy because it does technically work, but the arrow keys don't really let you access all parts of the menu. The power button will turn the camera off but not on. Stuff like that. So it works, but it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Speaking of bags, it comes with a little pouch that is actually almost impossible to fit the camera into when you have a battery attached. It also comes with pretty much the exact same powered microphone that all these cameras come with. They generally sound pretty thin and noisy, but I haven't tested this one yet, so let's actually do that and take a listen. Alright, so this is a test of this camcorder with the included powered microphone plugged into the audio input jack. Here in my sound booth, I'm about 6 to 8 inches away from the microphone. The microphone is pointed directly back at me, and this is how the microphone sounds. There are no adjustable audio levels. You can't see the level, so hopefully this is recording okay, but it is what it is, and this is what it sounds like. I interrupt your video to bring you some breaking news. I was just recording, test recording with the external microphone that was included, and I actually got my first major glitch with this camera. I went to try and view the videos, and I swiped to the video that I wanted to view, hit play. It was playing the wrong video, so I paused it, tried to swipe again, and it just locked. It said file error, and it locked up. Just long pressing the power button does not turn it off. It's locked. I'm going to probably have to pull the battery and just hope that those files are recoverable. So we will see. Wow, and that is repeatable because I just tried it again. And when you go into the play menu, if you try to swipe to a new video while a video is playing, it just locks up. And I'm pressing the power button. This is the power button. Press and hold. Does nothing. Can't play, swipe, power menu, record. Totally locks up if you try that. So if you're playing a video, don't try to swipe to the next one. So that was unfortunate, Pulling the battery seems to have reset it and the files were all there, but I also found that when in the view menu, once you start a video, if you stop it, scroll to a different video, and hit play again, it will begin playing the first video again. So, I did end up finding an interface oddity and a glitch. But anyway, the built-in microphone picks up a lot of handling noise, so you have to be careful, but there aren't any overly offensive artifacts, and it sounds better than pretty much any other generic camcorder I've tested. So this is 5K 30 with image stabilization on and daylight white balance, which actually seems to give a little bit more natural look than auto, but auto on this camera does seem a little bit better than auto on a lot of cameras like this. But this is what the internal microphone sounds like. I'm holding the camera just a few inches away from me. This is how I would normally hold a camcorder. I've got the little strap around my hand. I've got my elbow bent, holding it in tight to minimize shake, and it is a normal way to hold it, talking at a normal volume. It's not great. There's definitely a bit of harshness, especially in the top end, and there's a sort of a compressed sound, but it's so much better than what I'm used to from these type of cameras. And when I connected a DJI wireless microphone to the audio input jack, the results were totally usable. All right, once again, recording at 5K 30 frames per second, but this time I'm recording with a DJI wireless system into the camera. I have the microphone just clipped to my shirt. I've got the wind muff on it. It's not a lot of wind today, but there's a lot of ambient noise, so you might be hearing some of that. Thought I saw something. I got distracted. Thought I saw a turtle. Turtle! So yeah, this is how the audio sounds with a DJI wireless microphone recording into the camera. Let's see how good this sounds and how good the audio input is on this camera. I can't see the audio levels or change them in the camera itself, so hopefully it's not clipping, hopefully it's loud enough. We'll see. The sound is slightly colored with extra sibilance, but it still sounds downright okay. One big fumble, in my opinion at least, with the video capability of this camera is that it only records continuously for 12 minutes and 37 seconds. At that point, it stops recording. It does automatically start recording again, but it's not seamless. Even if you combine the videos after the fact, you lose a few seconds in between. That's a bit of a bummer because typically one advantage of a camcorder is unlimited recording. So this wouldn't be a great camera for longer videos unless a few seconds missing every 12 minutes or so isn't a problem. The camera has an infrared recording mode, and it has two little infrared LEDs on the front of the flip-out display. Those lights aren't super bright, but they are surprisingly helpful, even at short distances outside, which isn't always the case with cheap IR cameras. At least with the built-in lights. The spread of the beam from these lights seems to be closely matched to the viewing angle of the lens, so if you tilt the display down or up even a little, it gives a harsh cutoff of the light in the video. But if you leave it straight, the lights do offer a great combination of throw distance and beam spread. The image quality in low light drops a lot, as you might expect, but the dynamic range doesn't drop to abysmal levels in IR mode, and the image stabilization even continues to help smooth out shake, if only slightly. It's not going to compete with more expensive cameras, but the IR mode is as good as any cheap camcorder I've tried, and better than most. Part of that is due simply to the image stabilization, and partly due to the wider field of view that this camera has, which makes this camera much more usable indoors or in tight quarters in general than most generic camcorders I've tested, most of which seem to have a roughly 45mm equivalent field of view, but I'd say this camera is closer to 24 to 30mm without showing any major distortion, so that's nice. Unfortunately, some things on these cameras never change, and the ridiculous megapixel claims is one of them. Photos aren't too bad, but they are nowhere near 48 megapixels. I certainly wouldn't use this camera over a decent smartphone for pictures, but for a quick snap and good lighting, you could do worse with many cheap camcorders. At $170, this camera isn't super cheap. Who knows what the quality control is like, and these brands change around models constantly. That's one of the reasons I never link to these cameras in the description. The ad page might be a different camera tomorrow, or it might be a kitchen utensil if that's what the seller decides to put on that page. Plus, I have other cameras with this exact same body with totally different internals. This is model HDV255K, but I can't guarantee that every company printing HDV255K on the label or on the ad is putting the same camera in the box that you get or putting the same guts inside the camera. So even though something like the Sony CX405 costs more, it may still be a safer bet if you're looking for a camcorder. It has optical zoom, much better image stabilization, far more options for manual control, unlimited continuous recording, and more, not to mention a warranty. But this camera does have a usable audio input jack and an IR recording mode, and it is less expensive. In the end, this is genuinely one of the most functional and closest to what I would call a real camera out of all of the generic camcorders I've tested. But the dodgy ads, misleading resolution claims for videos and photos, questionable support, the blatant practice of buying positive reviews, and the fact that there's no way to ensure that the unbranded camcorder you get in a generic box today will be the same thing you get tomorrow stop me from being comfortable recommending people buy this. And that's not even mentioning the other negatives I talked about with the camera itself, or the fact that its reliability record was sullied when I tried to make this video. $170 is a chunk of money, and I can't quite feel right recommending people spend it on this camera. But that's just me. After watching the video, you can make up your own mind what's right for you. This is certainly a step in the right direction for these types of cameras, even if they just can't quite help themselves with the shady marketing. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions or if there's anything else you'd like me to test out with this camera, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. Take care.